does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tac-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him.
Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the CS hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on iconic Rockfin, Odyssey, or YouTube, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, thank you so much. We certainly do appreciate all of your continued support. You can rate the show if you'd like, if you think we are worthy of that. And please don't give me the 1-star rating like that prick a couple of weeks ago that said I told whiny, stupid stories and that 90% of my content was bullshit. It's 92% that's bullshit. Get it straight, buddy. And if you are looking for an unusual and kind of cool gift for your friends or family, or you're looking to trigger someone in your office, I've got a crazy merch store too that's available. You can get shirts. I've got baseball shirts like this one. I've got t-shirts, sweatshirts, stickers. The sticker collection is off the charts. If you are looking for stickers for your computer, if you're looking for coffee mugs to trigger the person in the cubicle next to you, let me tell you, you have come to the correct place. Go to the website, theoctopusofglobalcontrol.com. There's a merch store there. You might as well check out the links to the merch store for the Union of the Unwanted as well. You're going to understand why in a second. And thank you to our sponsors. Our new sponsor, True Hemp Science, has been phenomenal. I've been talking about this since they've come on board. They sent me a couple bottles early for me to test it out. And all I wanted it to do was make my left shoulder not hurt anymore. And that's what it has done. I don't understand the science behind it. I know that all CBDs are not created equal. I've been taking CBDs before, and that didn't fix my shoulder. But for whatever reason, the product that True Hemp Science is putting out is working. It's working for me. I can't say that it'll work for everybody every time. All I can do is mention my personal experience and say that it works. So I start off with, they gave me a couple bottles. I take this stuff called number 19, just a couple drops, and I take another kind that is 4-to-1. It just says 4:1, and then it's CBG to CBD. So those are 2 of the ones that I take in the morning. Kind of get a little buzz from it too. I'm not going to lie, kind of like a little energetic jolt to your day. So if you're looking to get work done, you might want to consider taking a look at truehempscience.com /macroaggressions. You can check out the page that they made for us. If you spend $65 or more, there is they'll give you a free bottle of number 81, this distillate that they've got. And there's also free shipping on any orders $150 or more inside the United States. They're a local small business in Austin, Texas. They're making great products. I like the guys over there a whole lot. And so far, so good. So if you're interested, truehempscience.com /macroaggressions. Check it out. On your way out at the checkout, use the promo code MACRO to save yourself some money. And since we're talking about getting ourselves sort of ready, physically ready, get your body ready, then you might as well be thinking about getting your family's food survival needs taken care of. Holy shit. Supply chain issues, hyperinflation, Bill Gates owning the food supply, a dark winter, according to Joe Biden. This is not a recipe for anything good. This is a situation where you're going to want to be prepared well in advance. You don't want to battle the mobs down at the grocery store trying to get the last bag of rice, right? So do yourself a huge favor. Plan accordingly. My Patriot Supply set up a landing page for us. It's called preparewithmacroaggressions.com. You can take a look there. You can get a 4-week supply of food, which I just sent to my mother, who received it this weekend. She's happy. She's set up. You can get a 3-month supply of food. You can get water filtration systems. You can get all kinds of things. They've got a ton of stuff. It's worth taking a look. There's still time to order for Christmas. Get in there and start buying what you need. Send it to your family. Don't freak them out. Just tell them it's for an earthquake. Don't tell them it's for the global economic collapse and zombie apocalypse, because you won't get invited over to Christmas if you do that. So take a look at the link, preparewithmacroaggressions.com. See if it's right for you. If not, listen, start preparing anyway. Get yourself ready. Go to the grocery store, buy extra cans of food, buy extra bags of rice, buy extra bags of beans, whatever you need to do, start doing it. If you're listening to crazy shows like this, you're going to get information that you won't find on the mainstream media. So you're going to hear about things that nobody else is talking about. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of being aware of this stuff when nobody else is. As soon as everyone else is aware of it, it's over, man. It's going to be a fucking gladiator fight in aisle 5, and I am not interested in doing that. So get yourself better to be a couple days early or a month or 2 early than a day late on this situation. So think about it like that. Well, the reason why I said you might want to check out the Union of the Unwanted merch store is because I have with me together collectively, like Wonder Twins, when we activate our powers, we form one half of the Union of the Unwanted. That is, of course, my good friend, Ricky Varandas from The Ripple Effect. What's going on, Ricky? How are you?
What's up, Charlie? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Well, when I want to get a good sort of assessment of what's happening in the world in general, and in the Northeast of part of the United States in particular, I know that I can count on you because you've got a pretty strong network out there. You've got a lot of guys that not just friends and family, of course, but content creators, guys like Richard Grove and the like in that area. And as of what I've just read today, we've got Wilhelm, the dear leader of New York, Bill de Blasio, and or New York City, I should say, and his band of merry maniacs that are mandating vaccines even for 5-year-olds, in order to go in restaurants and shops, and just in time for Christmas. Should we get him a Grinch outfit?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's madness. It still boggles my mind. It does, how people are still on board with this. Like, I just don't understand how much more evidence do you need? Like, so I was just listening to, what's his name? Pinker, Steven
Pinker on Rogan.
Yeah. Rogan, yeah.
You mean Steven Pinker from Epstein Island? Steven Pinker.
Yeah. Well, did you get to the part where they talked about Epstein?
No.
Oh, see, I for some reason I just had it in the background. I'm like, because I like some of Steven Pinker's work. We probably also have similar taste in women. I'm kidding. But it's funny because they talk about conspiracy theories, right? And it made me think. I'm like, there's something. This is the thing about all these people that it almost reminds me of the religious and atheistic point of views, where it's like both sides, if you go to both extremes, both of them think they're the open-minded ones, and don't realize they have flaws in their logic and their thinking, and have blinders on to some extent. And of course, that's not the case in all circumstances. But like, for example, Pinker was talking about conspiracy theories and how, like, the reason why people are conspiracy theorists. Like they're always looking for just something secretive or whatever, and how impossible it is to keep secrets and in such a scale. And one thing that drives me nuts, and I always hear people say it, and I always want to just like scream and like shake my phone that I'm listening to. I'm just like, they always say, if that was a conspiracy, somebody would have talked, or there would have been how do you keep that many people silent? And I always want to say, because you didn't, and people do talk. And there are, like, every conspiracy theory you can think of, every popular one, I should say, or every one that has a lot of truth to, there's tons of whistleblowers. There's tons of outspoken people.
Yeah.
You just don't hear them on the mainstream media. You don't hear their interviews. You don't hear their stories. You don't. So this idea that like, where are all these whistleblowers? Where are all these people that would be outspoken to expose what was really going on? It's like, no, those people exist. I mean, you brought up Richard Grove. Richard Grove is one in regards to 9/11, his whole story in 9/11 or linked to 9/11. I mean, nobody in the mainstream media is asking to interview Richard Grove and asking for his story. So,
or James Corbett, for that matter, who's done great documentaries on these things.
He's on Gary Webb, on who's the guy who did the octopus conspiracy, not the
Danny Casolaro.
Yes. Yeah. I think actually, even though he came first, I think when people think about that octopus conspiracy, they actually think of Charlie Robinson now.
Well, what's funny is that we were both 44 years old when we wrote our book, The Octopus. He wrote The Octopus. I wrote The Octopus of Global Control. But the difference is I didn't wind up in a bathtub with my wrist slit where Danny Casolaro did, because he was talking about the Promise software. And who was selling the Promise software with the back doors all over the place? Robert Maxwell.
Yeah.
And that'll get you killed in a motel room when you're about to write crack the big story about Inslaw and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is actually links up with what I was getting to in regards to the Pinker interview. Is what's fascinating is this is why I'm so turned off by people who think they're so logical and they have it figured out. Anybody who's like too confident or like to, I don't know, just come off like arrogant almost. Pinker, Rogan was trying to figure out like, okay, so what conspiracy do you believe in? Is there any that you believe in? And then he's like thinking about it. And then one way or another, I got into he brought up one that was ridiculous about like AIDS being a man-made virus to stimulate black. I don't know what it was, like the black community or something like that.
I agree with that.
Yeah, well, it is one of the more, I guess, fringe conspiracy theories because there's not as much evidence there as some of the other ones. Mm-hmm. But then he brought up so he went from that to the next one was Epstein killed himself. He thought that was ridiculous. And I'm like, please, Rogan, please, like, say something. Because I'm like, that is like easily debunked, the idea that he killed himself. It's
so Steven Pinker thinks Epstein did kill himself.
They did kill himself. And
is there any opinion less valuable on Epstein than a guy that took money from Epstein?
Well,
you know what I mean?
But that's my point. But even if he wasn't linked to Epstein, it shows how like people who, for lack of a better term, aren't conspiracy theorists, they look at all conspiracy theorists as people who are constantly looking for conspiracy theories. Like, even if they're not there, even if there's not the evidence to back it, you're just constantly looking for those things. So your brain is creating this illusion of what you want to find. And the opposite also happens. Like his flaws in his thinking, where he wants to be one of these debunkers, and that's the problem with like debunkers, is that you're constantly looking for flaws in a conspiracy theory just so you can say, hey, it's been debunked, or that's not right, or this isn't right. So it's like, be open-minded to everything. And he proved that he wasn't open-minded, and something as questionable as Epstein's death or murder or suicide, whatever you want to call it, the fact that you can't even entertain the idea that he was possibly murdered. And probably because of the things you've mentioned, his link to it and his link to probably many of his friends, because of a lot of people in the science community, it just shows the flawed logic in his thinking, and that's why I'm so concerned about people who come off all knowing or like, oh, I look at things logically. Because the thing about humans in general, like we all have, and again, I've said this over and over on my show, and I'm sure on other shows, so much of our thinking is influenced by subconscious things that we're not even aware of, and this goes into Edward Bernays and his techniques with propaganda and marketing, and understanding that a lot of our decision making can be swayed one way or another unknowingly. And even besides that, outside influences that's influencing our decision making, there's also internal things that can sway the way we look at things, sway the way we perceive something based on like our upbringing, trauma, people that we respect or like that have specific opinions that might influence us to maybe want to accept one perspective over another. Like that happens. And I don't know about you, Charlie, but like I'm constantly trying to make sure I'm not doing that. Right. Like, and most people don't.
Well, it's sort of a balance between, you try not to let all those things influence you. You try to be, let's say there's a new topic and you're trying to be as unbiased as possible. You realize you drag a certain amount of your own personal bias into this, but there's also something to be said for having enough experience. So like as this COVID narrative comes out, right? It starts in March of 2020. We have been doing shows about the pharmaceutical industry, the vaccine industry, how dirty they are. You've had Dell on. I've been at speaking at events with Dell as well. We know about it. So when COVID comes, we're already on the freeway, whereas everybody else is just getting in their car and just trying to get on the on-ramp to try and figure out what's going on. So you try not to drag your own personal bias in, but sometimes what you do need to drag in is your experience. You need to drag in the fact that I don't need to start at square one when it comes to understanding vaccines for this COVID thing. I'm way past that. But because I'm way past that, I'm already focusing on the details instead of like, hey, I wonder if I wonder if they're going to rush to market a vaccine. It's like, we already know they're going to do that. We know what they're going to do. We know how they're going to do it. We're well past that. So part of it is like, trying to make sure that you're not coming into it with a bias, but at the same time, how do you rectify that? Because you're going to come in with experience, and that's something that you do want. You want to have the experience of knowing who, like as an example, knowing who Fauci was. I didn't know who Fauci was, but a lot of people were like, "Oh, that guy's a bad guy," from the 80s and everything. So part of this is like the more information you have, the better ability you will have to sift through the bullshit. You'll be like, that's a lie, or I know who that guy is, I don't trust him. So part of what the conspiracy theorists of us, like we're always looking for these conspiracies, and it's like, look, man, I'd rather be looking at baseball scores and watching football games than doing this. I'm focusing on this because I feel it's important. And frankly, the conspiracy theories, they find us. We don't have to go looking for them. If you haven't been paying attention, there's a humongous vaccine conspiracy theory happening all around the world. So it's like guys like Steven Pinker, of course he doesn't believe in conspiracy theories because he's wrapped up with Jeffrey fucking Epstein. His name is all over him. All right. His stain is all over him. If I had been to the island a bunch of times and I had taken a bunch of money from Jeffrey Epstein, I wouldn't believe in conspiracy. I wouldn't want people to be believing in that stuff either. But I certainly wouldn't go on Joe Rogan. But he does because he's so fucking arrogant. He thinks that nobody knows any of that, or that anybody that knows that stuff about me, those are conspiracy theorists. It's like, no, dude, you're on the flight. You're on the flights. Please explain what you're doing, partying with a bunch of 14-year-old girls. Please explain. Take as much time as you need, right? So if Rogan's not asking that question, then what's he doing?
Yeah, well, I didn't listen to the whole show, so I don't know how deep they get into it. But he did get into before I stopped listening. He did talk about. He's like, well, he was linked to all these women who were alleging that they're underage and they were on this island with all these adult men and all this stuff. And so I'm surprised that Pinker. But this is you're right. This is the arrogance of people who are used to having the media on their side and having the resources to just keep just a rosy image. That he would even bring that up. Like when he said Epstein, we're like, oh, I like Epstein. And I'm like, wait, like Pinker's that's the conspiracy theory that maybe he assumed that Rogan wouldn't push back and get into it, but he did. And it's to me, it's like one of the most obvious ones. I mean, look at his sweetheart deal. I mean, there's endless amounts of evidence that there's something more going on. Ghislaine's Maxwell's father, obviously linked to the Mossad, all that stuff. I mean, anybody who's
sisters linked to data gathering, Chiliad software managing the FBI's entire counterterrorism database is being managed by Christine Maxwell's company. Christine Maxwell? Are you fucking kidding me? Seriously? Out of all the people running all the companies all over the world, you picked a spy's daughter to run the company that's in charge of the United States counterterrorism data information warehouse?
But doesn't it stun you how when the Epstein thing, because it was one of the darkest, probably one of the hardest to believe conspiracy theories for normies, right? Was the fact that the elite are actually involved with child trafficking, pedophilia, all this stuff. And when that got exposed, and Jeffrey Epstein, which was a name usually only heard on shows like yours or mine, and now was being talked about on mainstream media and got exposed, and it was almost so much evidence that it was undeniable. But yet the next conspiracy theory comes around and people will be like, no, that's crazy. And I'm like, wait. Like, it boggles my mind that like people can accept one thing but still have a hard time accepting the next one, even if there's evidence to prove it. You see it also with the COVID thing. And not to bring up Rogan again, but you'll hear him talk about how he thinks vaccines are safe and effective, but the COVID vaccine's not a vaccine. It's a mRNA technology. I mean, Moderna is not a vaccine company. They're a gene therapy company. So in some sense, he's right, but he almost says it to like almost discredit that the other vaccines could be also harmful, that he just wants to separate the two issues like they're two separate issues. And it's like, they're not two separate issues. The same way they discredited Eric Clapton, Jimmy Dore. I mean, people who've actually got the vaccines who are just sharing their personal experiences with adverse reactions. The same way that Big Pharma has so much influence that if anybody even said anything that would discourage somebody from getting the vaccine, they will get headlines made, they'll have articles written, and in no time they'll go through this whole character assassination campaign. Like, those big pharma companies have been doing that way before the COVID vaccine, and they're doing it. Yeah. Robert Kennedy Jr., which my good friend Dr. Jessica Rose, and who you're aware of and has been on Unwanted. She was just interviewed on his show, and I mean, this guy, Robert Kennedy Jr. I mean, this guy was beloved by the left and beloved by people who were anti-corporations, and because he was a part of so many lawsuits in regards to like chemical companies and all this stuff. And I think he was a part of like the biggest DuPont lawsuit and all these lawsuits. And all of a sudden he gets dragged into this vaccine conversation, and he goes from being a hero to being a lunatic. But to go back also to this, and this reminds me of another example of arrogance. How about when Dershowitz had a debate with Robert Kennedy Jr.? I mean, this is a guy who shouldn't be showing his face anywhere with all the Epstein stories and all that stuff. Right, and this guy is, and he's not a fucking doctor. And he has a debate with Robert Kennedy Jr., who actually has a history of fighting against corporations that are harming the public. And so he knows much more about these type of topics than Dershowitz. And so it just shows, how arrogant these people are, and also how powerful these pharmaceutical companies' resources are, that they can discredit somebody. I just had Mickey Willis on my show again. And I mean, you want to talk about a guy, this guy, and this, to bring it back to Fauci a little bit. I don't know if you know the story about his gay brother, but his gay brother, had AIDS, and he was, they were promoting AZT, and his mother was like, these experts are saying you should take this drug. And I guess his brother didn't really want to take it. And then his mother kind of talked him into it. And eventually the drug killed him. And then his mother felt such guilt that he thinks she ended up passing away. I think it was like 30 something days later, just from the guilt of losing her son, based on possibly, her desire to believe these people that are on TV that are supposed to be public health experts. And that's why somebody like him was kind of, like you said, wisdom and experience kind of becomes a handy tool, and I think a good thing to have, because he realized we're being lied to before many others, because he had this personal experience with, AZT and Dr. Fauci's link to it. I've been told recently to go watch Dallas Buyers Club again, and I did. And the parallels between that era and what happened then and what's happening now is just mind-boggling. I mean, it's just like, wow, this is like just it's the same script. It's that they're doing it again, and for some reason we're so delusional to this idea that somebody who has a PhD, or somebody that we call a doctor, or somebody who's on TV as a official could lie to us or could harm us. Like, it's crazy. We put these people on this pedestal just because of this label. I mean, the fact that nobody questioned Bill Gates going around giving health advice, when I have no doubt in my mind I could beat his ass. I mean, this dude's never worked out in his life. I mean, he doesn't know anything about health. And my whole life you played soccer, you played sports. Anybody who's an athlete, anybody who has been a gym rat like myself and been around other athletes and other people who play sports or work out, like, I'll take advice over you, that you give over some scientist or some, software CEO who's probably never worked out and never put these things into practice. That's why I say Dr. Jessica Rose is so unique, because she's not just a PhD. She's not just a doctor and an expert in viruses and immune systems and all that stuff. She's also a professional surfer, so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's a professional surfer, and that's actually her first passion.
Is she the we've had her on the Union show? I know she's the current guest on Ripple Effect right now, but is she the one in Israel?
Yeah, she's Canadian, and then she ended up in Israel, and ended up just being stuck there during the whole COVID thing. But it kind of has helped her, because one, she refuses to get vaccinated, so she can't leave her house, and two, she's amazing at analyzing stats and information, and she's an expert in that field. So she's been analyzing the VARS stuff and really just doing an amazing job. I think that's the topic that Robert Kennedy Jr. had her on for, to talk about that, and really, like, they really dissected how awful the VARS system is, and then but yet it's the only system we really have, because apparently the Canadian system sucks, and most other countries don't even have a system to keep up with this. So, I mean, it boggles my mind that we don't think that having a really good way of keeping up with vaccine deaths is a priority.
That's crazy. It's crazy, because the numbers that I hear in the pre-COVID, like, we're just talking like MMR, flu shots, all the things that were, all the adverse effects that were reported to VAERS, which is Vaccine Adverse Effects Reporting System, that even with all of those, it was usually one out of it was only like 1% of actual cases that should be reported that were being reported for a variety of reasons. One being, the most common one being, people didn't know that it existed, that there's a place to report this. Another one was that the doctors didn't want to do it. The doctors didn't want to fill out the paperwork because they were busy. They didn't want to fill out the paperwork and leave a paper trail saying, hey, one of my patients got injured. That might look bad on me. So they weren't participating in it. So the system that we have is garbage, and it's better, like you said, it's better than Canada's. It's better than the reporting systems elsewhere, and it's starting to become known that you can report adverse effects to these places. But even when you do, you have to take the numbers and then add some multiple to it. Take all the deaths that it shows there in this chart and then multiply that by 100 or multiply that by 57 or whatever the number is that the people have sort of come up with to say, listen, this VAERS number is way low, way low.
Well, you know about the study where Harvard was asked to do some research on the VAERS or VARS.
That's the 2009 Harvard Pilgrim study, yeah.
And they said it's 1% is inputted.
1%. Yeah, that's where the numbers came from. So think of it like this: pre-COVID. Let's go pre-COVID. The VAERS, through the VAERS court, which is a kangaroo court. It's a joke of a court. The fact that anybody gets any payments out of there is a miracle. When you do get a payment there, you are forced to sign a confidentiality non-disclosure that has a clawback provision that they will come back for 10 times what the money they gave you. So if you got $1 million because your kid wound up paralyzed from the flu shot, then they'll come after you for $10 million. They'll win. You'll be living in your car with your vaccine damaged kid. So even through all of that, even through the fact that nobody knows about this system, the fact that it's a miracle you get any payments, they've still paid out $4.2 billion to settle vaccine damage claims. And to put that in perspective, that's $200 million more than the Catholic Church has paid out to settle rape allegations. And we know how dirty that is. So then you take that $4.2 billion number, you then factor in the Harvard Pilgrim study, that's saying that number should be 100 times higher. Now we're talking about $420 billion that should have been paid out to settle these vaccine adverse effects. And keep in mind, none of that payout, none of the actual 4.2 billion or the extrapolated 420 billion, none of that reflects autism. Autism, you will get automatically declined if you go through the VAERS system trying to get a payout for an autism diagnosis. Won't happen. All that money, half the 4.2 billion is from the flu shots and the other half is from a variety of other ones. But if you go in there claiming autism, you'll get zero. So what is that number? Trillions? It's dirty.
I think that's the thing. It's very hard to prove that, because most of these doctors will just, and pediatricians will just, they'll poo-poo it. They'll just be like, oh, you just didn't notice that they had some issues prior to the vaccine. And that's the common thing you hear. I mean, two amazing stories that I think people should look into. One, I have Dr. Brian Hooker on my show, who is the focus of the Vax documentary. A lot of people saw it as a anti-vax documentary. It wasn't an anti-vax documentary. It was really about this one cover-up story with Dr. William Thompson. Dr. William Thompson worked at the CDC. Have you told this story on your show before?
No, but I saw Vaxxed in theater.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I went to, my wife and I went to see a theater, and then the following day went back. We took my mother-in-law, who sat through the entire movie. And then when she got done, she was like, I don't understand why you guys are anti-vaccine.
Wait.
Were we watching the same movie?
Wait. She didn't.
She couldn't, she sat through that whole movie and was like, I don't know.
Wow. When people
that's a cognitive dissonance brick wall there.
It's wow.
Like you can go into, I feel like you can go into that movie on the fence and just go, all right, I'll sit through the movie. I'll watch it. And you watch it and you go, okay, there's something going on here. And you don't need to be a virologist. You don't need to be a conspiracy theorist. You don't need to do any of those things. Watch the movie Vaxxed, directed by Del Bigtree, and and starring Dr. Brian Hooker that you mentioned, and the story of what the CDC did and how they buried documents. If you want to say that makes somebody, I mean, if I don't know, whatever, I don't care what people want to label that. If you rightly recognize that the oversight committee, the CDC, the group that is in charge of overseeing this, if you watch that movie and you don't come away with that with a deep understanding of how corrupt that organization is, I don't know what to tell you. And that's the group that oversees vaccine schedules. They have a vested interest in them. They own patents on vaccines. They make $5 billion a year from the patents they own on the vaccines that they mandate through the schedule that they create. It's like, you don't have to be anti-vax to understand that is a major conflict of interest. And and then you've got the revolving door of big pharma and Julie Gerberding coming in and out, and Scott Gottlieb and all these people. And it's like FDA, Pfizer, CDC, where's the line? The line is so blurred. They're all together. And so when you had Brian Hooker on, I mean, what did they do to him? What did they do? What did it do to his life? I mean, his life was dealing with his severely autistic child, which of course took up a majority of his time, and I'm sure still does. But what sort of punishment was he put through?
Well, that's why one thing people don't realize is how many of these people who are outspoken and now faces and voices in the anti-vax movement, or at least the health freedom movement, because I don't like using the anti-vax movement, because I wouldn't say I'm anti-vax per se. I'm one of those people that, okay, like if you have all the information and you decide you want to vaccinate your kids, that's up to you. You have the freedom to do that. You have the right to do that. Sure. So I'm for freedom, like the freedom to decide. And I've always been kind of that way. But a lot of these people who are in the movement, they're people who have personal stories. I mean, Don and Brian Festa from CT Freedom Alliance and We the Patriots USA, they have personal stories. When you look at, Brian Hooker, same thing, personal story. A scientist who was just like, hey, I think there could be a link between the vaccine my child got and his autistic symptoms, contacts the CDC. And then for people who didn't watch the movie, I'll give a quick little rundown. Gets hooked up with a doctor, one of the head guys called Dr. William Thompson, who was the author of a MMR study that basically showed that there was a link between the MMR vaccine within the first 12 months of life and an increase in autistic symptoms. And they suppressed this research from the public. That research basically just created a guilt trip in Dr. William Thompson and started giving Dr. Brian Hooker the research, gave him the studies, gave him, they talked about it, and he ended up recording, Dr. Brian Hooker recorded the phone calls. So even with recorded phone calls, even with copies of the research from one of the head authors of this study, people still think like, oh, no big deal. Like that's not enough evidence. Robert De Niro, who they went on everybody was more than happy to interview him when he didn't watch the documentary yet, didn't know what it was. And his film festival decided not to show the Vax documentary. But then he did only 1 or 2 interviews after he watched the documentary, where I remember one was on the Today Show or Good Morning, I don't know, one of the morning shitty shows that they have. And he's like, listen, I watched the documentary. I think something is there. I think it's worth exploring. I think that everybody should watch this documentary. I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, even he's a actor who has a autistic child. He's seeing this documentary and saying, this kind of makes sense. And I think a lot of people, when they get exposed to that information, they look at people they know, or that maybe their own children, and be like, okay, did my child have an adverse reaction after he got that vaccine? And to me, the whole thing is just, it's not that hard to believe. I know people on my show, some people hate me constantly using this metaphor, and other people are like, no, it's a perfect metaphor. But I always use the example of peanut butter. I'm like, if I mandated peanut butter for every child in the world, some kids are going to fucking die. Like, right. it doesn't mean that peanut butter, because people always use the example of, well, I know kids who are vaccinated. I was vaccinated and I'm fine. I eat peanut butter and jelly and I'm fine, even though I don't eat carbs anymore. But if I were to eat peanut butter and jelly, and I have in the past, I'd be fine. That doesn't mean peanut butter, it doesn't discredit somebody who dies from peanut butter. It doesn't mean peanut butter can't be lethal to some people. So this idea that like, I know people who've been vaccinated and are fine, or I myself have been vaccinated and I'm fine. Same thing with the COVID vaccine. People are like, oh, I got the vaccine, I'm fine. It doesn't, and it's super unscientific. Okay. It's super unscientific to give the same cocktail of ingredients, any one ingredient to everybody, and think that everybody's going to have the exact same result and outcome. It's madness. It's crazy. It makes no sense. I have family who just came here for the holidays from Portugal, and my uncle and aunt, and they're from northern Portugal, and they came to Massachusetts, which isn't really it's not like Florida or Texas. I don't know how Colorado is, but it's not one of the most, post-COVID places in regards to people kind of fully living their lives. Like there's still a bunch of vaginas who are just afraid of going places and wearing double masks or whatnot.
Don't catch winter vagina.
and they came to Massachusetts, okay? And they're like, wow, I was so happy to see how people are gathering and being normal. And I'm like, well, how bad's fucking Portugal? And they're like, people still won't gather. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like Portugal makes me so fucking upset, because one of the great things about that country is that they've been pretty neutral throughout. You look at throughout world history, especially, recent world history, the world wars or whatnot, they've been pretty neutral. We're like, we like to stick to our, mind our own business, not get involved, which is what makes that country so beautiful, is that you go there and they're pretty open-minded to different cultures, different people. And they don't, you don't have to worry about too many, terrorist attacks or anything like that, because we haven't been bombing other people's countries.
No, and when you do colonize places, it's places like Macau, which is like a little island, and you put casinos there, which is cool.
Yeah, which basically it is like a little Las Vegas. It is funny how they call it.
Trip. I've been there. It's a weird place though.
Oh, have you been there?
Yeah, I've been to Macau. Yeah, you go in the casinos. Like I was living in Vegas, and I was on a work trip to Hong Kong, and we're like, well, we got to go to Macau and go check it out. So my buddy and we slipped over there and went for a night and just hung out and to see what was going on. And in the casinos, like you go through a Vegas casino and it's like hustle and bustle and energy and talking and smoking and drinking and all this stuff going on. You go through a casino in Macau and it's fucking silent.
What?
And I was like, what's going on? We met with my one of my coworkers I was there with was my old college roommate. So like we were working together, but we've known each other for a long time. And he knew a bunch of people in Hong Kong. And one of the guys he knew owns like a liquor distribution company. And he's like, I service all the casinos. And we're like, holy shit, you must be just banking. He's like, not really. He goes, the number one drink in all these casinos is tea, followed by like water and everything. I go, no. He goes, alcohol's not even in the top 10. I was like, what? He's like, no. They see it as like battle. Like we're going to war against the casino, and I don't want to be all fucked up, and I don't want to be slipping at all. I don't want to be miscounting my cards or anything. So he's like, when you go, he's like, because he told us, he's like, hey, can you take some bottles of wine over? Because we were in Hong Kong, we were going to Macau. He's like, can you take a couple bottles of wine to my client at this Italian restaurant down there? We're like, yeah, sure, no problem. We're going anyway. So we deliver the wine, and then we go to the casinos, and it's like, there's no fun in there at all. It is the weirdest, most sterile thing. And you walk by and there'll be like thousands of people in there gambling and nobody's talking. And I was like, dude, this sucks. So I know that I'm just going to say that like Macau, if you think like, oh, I'm going to go to Macau, it's going to be killer for like gambling, go to Vegas instead. Don't even bother, because it's fucking weird there. That's my PSA for.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know too much about Macau besides what I've read and some of the.
Yeah, it's just that when you go there, it's a strange mix of people speak. Well, when I was there, the people were still speaking Cantonese, but it's like Cantonese and Portuguese. Like, and I'm like, whoa, okay. So.
Yeah, it is. It is weird in that sense. It's funny how that's why the whole the race issue, the gender issue, the culture issue. I'm like, throughout history, there's been so much mixtures of things and different versions of different languages. I mean, when the Moors went all the way west to Portugal, there was a Arabic Portuguese like hybrid language. There's like, there's all this stuff, and it's like, who knows? I mean, as I was born in Portugal, my parents were born in Portugal, my grandparents, my great grandparents. You go down the line, we think we're 100% Portuguese. Somewhere it's like it could have been somebody from the Middle East who traveled there and then end up staying there, and who knows. So
but it's funny that like Portugal has this decriminalization of drugs, and had tremendous success with that. And I associate that with like a unique way of looking at a problem, maybe coming at it from a different angle, maybe not from a government authoritarian angle, but from some sort of compassionate angle. Like, all right, let's try to understand drug addiction and how it works and what's best to treat it, instead of just criminalizing it and just putting all these people in jail. So I'm like, I see that and I go, Portugal is sort of forward thinking. They're trying new things. And then you hear about the COVID stuff and the lockdowns, and you're like, what so what? All that just went out the window? It's like,
Well, that's not even the worst of things. Well, they're kind of like the Canada of Europe. I feel like they're like people, they're nice there, and they don't really have a backbone. I shouldn't say a backbone. They're just kind of unaware of, or maybe they're just too nice, where they just like the government says to do something, they just do it. And and they're also like Canada because nobody knows exactly what they eat or what their culture is. I'm kidding. But it's but like, another funny thing about my Portuguese family there is that when they were giving out stimulus checks, I have relatives that have not been in the country in no exaggeration, like 20, 30 years. And they were all getting their stimulus checks in the mail.
Wow.
They were sending out government money, which is supposed to be to stimulate our government.
Right.
I mean, when you're sending the money to a not U.S. address,
that should be the first indicator, right?
That's how awful our government is.
Oh, they're so
like they were. So think about how many like millions of dollars probably went overseas to people who lived in the U.S. for a short period of time and didn't. I mean, when they told me this, I'm like, what? Wait, you guys got a stimulus check? I'm like, and my uncle, who I haven't seen in like how many years because he hasn't been in America in forever, like he got a stimulus. Like it blows my mind.
Buy Bitcoin, buy Monero, buy cryptocurrencies that are capped. This hyperinflation is coming. Oh my God, it's so crazy. I wonder about this. Like, so, like I've done an episode. Actually, I think I did 2 episodes on the SPARS pandemic document, right? It's this document that came out in 2017 that talked about how everything, they were simulating the outbreak of a novel coronavirus in 2025, and it was going to be this big thing, and it played out almost identical to the way it played out in real life. They were talking about media manipulation, like a combination of pharmaceutical industry and the media, and how they were going to make this messaging work in a way that was consistent. And so that's the idea of it. But along the way, after the vaccines roll out, about 9 months out, which is like right now for us, the wheels fall off in this fictional document, right? So that everyone starts dying from it. They all start getting mad cow disease and sponge brain and things like that. And it becomes undeniable that it's not the virus, it's the vaccine, right? Let's go to speculation island for a second here. And I hope this doesn't happen, obviously. But what if that SPARS pandemic document actually does continue to play out and does become true? What if the Deagle chart that had been out in 2015, prior to 2015, but showing from 2015 to 2025, population of America dropping from 340 million down to 99 million. Same with Canada, same with the UK, same with France, same with the Western world. Just a straight up 70% population cut. Let's just allow ourselves the flexibility to go and speculate for a couple minutes. What does that look like? what happens if it's 2025? We're coming up here pretty close on the beginning of 2022. You go all of 2022, all of 2023, all of 2024. Let's just say it's 3 years. It's now New Year's Day 2025. We're 3 years more into this. And 70% of the people that we are used to living with are fucking dead or incapacitated. Are we going to be living? Are we going to be eating the bugs at that point? I mean, how can society adjust to that? A depopulation event of that massive. And I know we're speculating here, and obviously, again, a disclaimer. I hope none of this happens. But considering how fucking accurate these forecasts have been with regard to the way the vaccines are playing out and the dangers of them, like if this truly is a depopulation agenda, how do we even deal with that?
Well, hasn't wars been kind of depopulating, right? It's now it makes me now wonder, like, how many wars are created or propaganded not just for profit and resources, but maybe because of the eugenics movement, maybe because it's a great way of depopulating some of the world, and you can do it quickly. Everybody thinks it's because you're fighting for freedom, and it's not quite as noticeable or as obvious as what they're doing now. I think that you can't dismiss all the athletes. These are, you're talking about, if you're a professional, if you're a Division III athlete playing any sport, you're a pretty fucking good athlete. Now you're talking about not just a Division II or Division I, but the best of Division I athletes. And these guys are having spontaneous, and again, this is all pretty much, they're almost all heart issues, which we know is linked to the vaccine. It's a possible side effect and something we've been seeing a lot of. We've also been seeing a lot of fans during games, which is crazy. I'm a Tottenham fan, a Hotspurs fan, and they had one happen during their game. They had to postpone the game. Sissoko, who plays for, I forget what team he plays for. He's a Frenchman who used to play for Tottenham and now plays for Watford, maybe. But anyways, he did the same thing where he noticed somebody had a heart attack and he ended up going to the referee. So it's similar to a Tottenham player who did that. Chelsea game recently just got postponed because of something that happened in the out there in the stadium. Some heart issue, some type of cardiac arrest type thing. You can't dismiss this. I've been watching sports for a long time, and I'm sure you have too. I would have picked up on some time, and honestly, I used to watch a lot more of sports than I do now because of obviously being a parent and all the other, podcasting and all the other things that take up your time. If this was happening before, if this ever happened before in my lifespan, I would have picked up on it. I would have remembered it. I've never seen anything close to this. And a lot of it's happening in very vaccinated countries like the UK or professional athletes who've been forced to get vaccinated. So I don't think it's a coincidence. And, how many coincidences do you need before it's something that you start entertaining? And the new variants and all this stuff, to me, it's a perfect way of covering up, these adverse reactions. Because now, how do you know if people are having adverse reactions or it's a new variant that causes heart attacks or heart inflammation or whatever? It's like, you don't know. It's something Dr. Jessica Rose told me, and I have, she was recently on my show. I did an amazing 3-hour podcast with her Friday. She returned it because she hooked me up. She suggested him and then hooked me up with he was a personal sniper of Trudeau in Canada. He was basically a Secret Service of Canada, and who ended up leaving his job because of his vaccine. His not wanting to take the vaccine. So she joined me for that interview.
He was a sniper, like defending, like Secret Service, like defending him type thing, or like, or like, hey buddy, go shoot this guy for me. Sniper or assassin?
Not an assassin. He was a personal sniper. And basically like who the organization he worked for in Canada, it's kind of like the Secret Service and the FBI all in one, like that organization kind of takes care of all that. But he worked directly. He was on Trudeau's personal team and it's Secret Service. So, which is cool because he's the second Secret Service. I had Abraham Bolden on my show years ago. He was, I don't know if you know who he is. He's the first Black Secret Service agent on a presidential detail, handpicked by JFK. And yeah, crazy story because at that time, you like African Americans weren't, they didn't think intelligent enough or responsible enough to guard the president. He was the first one because JFK liked him. They actually threw him in, what did they put him in? I forget his story because it's been so long since he's been on the show. And he was like 80 something when he was on, an amazing storyteller. But here's another example of a whistleblower, somebody who has a personal story, was involved with the JFK assassination or linked to the JFK assassination. And people will be like, oh, nobody talked. You know, it's like this guy, his story is insane. He gets, JFK liked him, put him on his personal team. I'm going to get the story a little wrong because it's been a long time, but it was something like so JFK was supposed to be in Chicago. They find a sniper there. They arrest him because the Secret Service goes there and ahead of time and like scopes out the area, finds this guy, had no ID, didn't know who he was. So then they end up canceling the Chicago trip, and then he ends up going to Dallas. Obviously, we know what happened in Dallas. So, and then Abraham Bolden's like, well, who the fuck was that guy we arrested? And this must be linked. Well, what they end up doing is they end up saying that he was taking money from the mob, arresting him, putting him in a mental institute for years.
This is the Secret Service guy?
This is a historic figure, first Black guy on a presidential detail, should be in, African-American history books, and instead is considered a crooked cop who was taking money from the mob and put in an insane asylum. Eventually his family, he got out, and the only way he got out is because the doctor who was keeping him in there eventually hung himself. Crazy story. Holy so he ends up getting out. His family, as he gets older, is like, hey, what the fuck are they gonna do to you now? You're 80 something years old. Like, how, what are they going to do to you? Let's set the record straight. So he ends up getting together with, what's his name? Mark Lane, I believe. Mark Lane helped him, at the time when Mark Lane was still alive. And they talked about doing a movie, and then he ended up writing a book called Echoes from Daily Plaza about his whole story. And when he was on my show, Obama was still president, and he had a petition out to try to clear his name and clear his record, because first Black president in American history. Like, why wouldn't you want to get on board with this and clear his name? And so really fascinating story.
Did Obama do anything to help him clear his name?
No, I don't believe so. I don't think.
What a surprise.
Yeah, not a surprise. I mean, everything's a facade, like it's all a illusion, this whole idea of, that's why it was hilarious that like all these race issues popped up and like Biden will fix these race issues. I'm like, we already had a Black president who didn't fix whatever supposed race issues you're trying to fix. And now you think like the grumpy old man who lives next door who pops people's soccer balls when they go into their yard is going to fix the issue. It's hilarious. Yeah,
as he's eulogizing Robert Byrd and Strom Thurmond, both members of the KKK, and calling them some of his best friends. Joe Biden's going to fix race relations. Okay. Yeah, but there's people out there that think that. That's crazy. But I don't. The last year and a half going through all of this. Vaccines, and like we joked about this. I remember joking about, that the vaccine is going to make, as a obviously a comedic example, the vaccine is going to make your left arm fall off, right? It's just for whatever reason, every time everyone that's taking the vaccine, the left arm falls off. But I said, don't worry, because immediately when that starts happening, the new variant will be announced, whose side effect is that your left arm falls off if you get it, so that they'll conflate these two. And obviously I'm just trying to make kind of a goof on that. But the point is, whatever the vaccine does to you, they're going to say that there's a new variant, that's what's actually doing it. And here we come. I mean, we called it so far in advance, it's like, oh, let me guess, the Omicron variant is going to cause heart attacks, right? Is that going to be the thing? Oh, now they're saying it's mild, right? But there's other people that are saying, no, one of the side effects is definitely heart attacks and everything. And you're like, this is never going to end until people wake up. And I feel like after the last year and a half, like if you're not aware or awake to what's going on, like what are you fucking doing? What are you doing? Like, how are you not noticing this?
Our last Union of Unwanted, I felt like a lot of people weren't so optimistic about the future. In a way, I can see why they're not, and another way, I can see why people are, because again, like the fact that Rogan is now a show as big as his is having a debate with Sanjay Gupta and kind of defending our perspectives and exposing some of this. And when you see people openly who never really paid attention to the vaccine or medical freedom movement at all, now being outspoken, really active members of the community, and so many people now entertaining the possibility that a vaccine could harm somebody, and also open to so many other things, like open to the fact that Bill Gates might not just be somebody who's trying to protect everybody by vaccinating the world. And I almost, it makes me feel optimistic. It makes me feel, but I get it. It's all perception, because like my family that's in Portugal, they feel like, what the fuck? This is never ending. They're mandating the vaccine. My aunt was telling me that she thinks that they're proposing mandating a vaccine passport to travel into Portugal or go or leave Portugal or anything like that. And so I'm like, shit, and then you look at like other places like California that is really bad, and other places, Australia, obviously New Zealand, all these places that are really bad. And then, I just came back from Florida not too long ago, and it's like it never happened down there. People don't even talk about it. So it's like, it's hard to get a feel for like the whole global movement, because counting on where you are, your feelings change. Like, okay, I go to Florida, I'm like, oh fuck, like I'm optimistic because these people don't give a fuck down here. They're living their lives. They're fine. And nobody, I mean, it's almost not even a topic that gets brought up. And then you come back to Massachusetts, or you go, you talk to somebody who lives in Portugal or somewhere else, and it's like they're still living in this panic, and like it's not over yet. And it's like, it's not just over. It never really happened. And it's all like perception. So it's like, for me, it's like, it's so hard to get a grasp of like, okay, is the majority of the world moving in the direction as you and I, and like, this is all bullshit, we got to put our foot down? Or are there more people who are going to comply, where even if there's people who believe in or have doubts about what's going on, they're just going to comply and give the politicians and give the pharmaceutical companies what they want, and that's more money and power.
I think the one thing that will bring this to a screeching halt is if that SPARS pandemic document does come true, and people just start dropping dead. And beyond the athletes on the field, beyond the, oh, look at that nurse. Remember the nurse that gave like the press conference, and she's in the middle of it and she's going, oh, and then slumps down and falls over. She's dead. DEAD, dead.
She died?
Like, how many more? Like, at some point.
He did die?
That lady? Yeah.
Because I heard a story. They were debunking that because, again, I don't. This is the
found her death certificate. I saw. Well, I mean, listen, I saw her death certificate. So for whatever that's worth, but yeah, she's dead. Yeah, a lot of these people are dead.
Yeah, because some of the. Well, I mean, look at all the black athletes when the vaccine was coming out.
They were like, look,
Marvin. I think
Henry Aaron
DMX
died from it. You've got some group that are like, they took it and they all start dropping dead. And then you got the other group like Antonio Brown, who's like, fuck that noise, I'm getting myself a fake vaccine card.
Yeah, how many of these athletes that aren't dropping dead are because they're lying about the vaccine status?
Or getting a saline injection or something.
I would not. Well, I remember Miriam said that on a Union Done Unwanted, how she thought that there was a portion of the vaccine that is probably just bullshit, that there's nothing in it, and just to prevent like too much evidence that they're killing people or harming people. And I'm like, that would make sense. That would, one, it would be super cheap because obviously you're not really saying anything, and two, it would cover up some of it and add some confusion with the whole thing, because it's like, how does this person have none of these side effects? I get sent some crazy shit. Have you seen, I'm sure you do too on social media, have you seen somebody send me a video of somebody cutting open a chicken that they gave the vaccine to, and like it was they froze it, and like a week later they cut it open and like the insides were like moving, and I'm just like, whoa. It was like, yeah, I'm like, I don't know. It's funny because if Alex from Skeptico was here, he'd probably be like, Rick, plant your flag somewhere. And I'm like, no, I can't plant my flag. I don't or not. I don't want to. I want to assume it's like a bullshit, like a hoax online. But there's so many things that seem like hoaxes that, I mean, the whole magnet on your arm thing seemed like a hoax. But then there's so many people that said that, it worked and that happened. They know people that you can put a magnet on their arm where they got vaccinated and it sticks. I'm like, well, is it a hoax? Is it a online just trending bullshit thing? I don't discredit.
I don't know, but that's kind of the point, is that if the vaccine industry was as safe and effective, there shouldn't be all of these weird hybrids that sprout off of this, vaccine deaths, and we shouldn't even be having the conversation. But the fact that we are is an indicate. The fact that there's even the possibility that the magnet is sticking, that shouldn't happen if you're making products that are safe and effective, that you're mandating people to get so that they can move around the country or move around from country to country or get into a fucking Denny's to have lunch. I mean, this is insane. If you're going to mandate these things, they have to be as safe as possible. The fact that there have been no safety studies, no long-term safety studies, and the animals they gave the injections to wound up all dropping dead. There's big problems with a lot of this stuff, and we're supposed to just pretend like that stuff doesn't exist. Like, that's crazy.
How do you ignore the fact that, and that's the other thing too, you would think that now this becoming a public discussion about the fact that there are treatments that work. Okay, Rogan has recommended his treatment or whatever he's doing to many people like Aaron Rodgers and
Dan
White recently and many others, and so there are other alternatives that work. And Peter McCullough, who's been on my show, is one of the most outspoken people in regards to this. I don't know. Did you have Dr. Joel Hirschhorn on your show?
Yeah, you got me a strike on YouTube.
How are you still on YouTube? I mean, that's awesome.
I don't know.
Yeah, well,
I'm just barely treading water, because when I look at my analytics, it's like, you have grown 3 new subscribers this month. I'm like, oh wow, great.
Yeah, but Joel Hirschhorn, his book Pandemic Blunder, that's one of the things that, and again, not an anti-vaxxer, he actually got the vaccine, and he talked about all these doctors, and he's been in the medical world and working at hospitals and working at universities his whole life with medical teams, and knows a lot of different doctors and researchers. He had, that's the first thing that sparked his skepticism, was the fact that there's so many doctors saying we're treating people with this, we're treating people with that, we're treating people. And even if there was some evidence of like, oh, one person who got treated this way and it didn't work, like that doesn't fucking mean that, it doesn't work for everybody. And it doesn't mean that you should ban it, because there's a lot of shit that doesn't work for everybody and can't harm people, like every single prescription drug that's been FDA approved ever. And yet we let people still have the option to take it. So yeah, when you would figure, because there are alternatives, there are treatments, there are protocols that seem to work, how the fuck can you pick one protocol, one treatment in regards to this vaccine and say this is the one that we're mandating to everyone always forever, none of the other stuff, we're not going to even let you entertain all the other options? That alone, like, why aren't people waking up to that? And shouldn't that make mandating the vaccine completely illegal, because there's other alternatives where you know, when it was under the Emergency Authorization Act, and of course they demonized ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and all these other options for the purpose of being able to go through the emergency authorization with the vaccine, because if there was any other treatments, then the vaccine would not be able to be pushed through the emergency authorization. You have to basically and I think Dell was the first one who told me this, that because I didn't realize that, but you if you had any treatments whatsoever that showed any promising effects, they couldn't fast track the vaccine. And
it had to be one thing and one thing only. If you brought in ivermectin or remdesivir or any of these other anything else, that would nullify the emergency use authorization, because it has to be the only thing. So I understand the mechanics of it, and you and I both understand why they're demonizing it. It's just the fact that they are demonizing it, which shows that the whole thing is a gigantic charade and that it's not about your health. Because if it was about your health, it'd be, we're working on the vaccine, but in the meantime, take better care of yourself, get some sunlight and take vitamin D and go to the gym and get fresh air and eat healthy food and do all these things. None of that. We never had any of that. And certainly ivermectin immediately was being called horse paste and horse dewormer, and all the hysterics on the corporate horror media go on and say Joe Rogan is dangerous, he's anti-science and all this stuff. It's like, I know why you're doing that.
And and they call him and this is the thing is, I hope that Joe Rogan, everybody who has never questioned vaccines in their life, like a Jimmy Dore, Eric Clapton, whoever it may be, that has seen what happens when you question vaccines and you get labeled an anti-vaxxer. I hope that they will look back at people like Dr. Andy Wakefield, Dr. Robert, Robert Kennedy Jr., people like Del Bigtree, people who have been in this, anti-vax movement, for lack of a better word, and think like, okay, maybe I only think that they're anti-vaxxers because the media did to them the character assassination to them that they are now doing to me. And maybe I should look into it instead of just assuming that they are anti-vaxxers that aren't backed by any science and don't know what they're talking about, the same way that they've convinced people that I'm an anti-vaxxer and I don't know what I'm talking about and you shouldn't get health advice from me. So I'm hoping it opens people's eyes to this whole thing. And there's so one time Joe Rogan had Dr. Hotez on his show, who is a piece of shit, the guy with the glasses.
A tremendous piece of shit.
Yeah, so he had him on, and of course, what do you think?
He's had him on like 10 times.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that guy's been on Rogan as much as Mike Baker from the CIA.
Yeah, and so the thing is, he had him on. And this is the thing is that I was kind of disappointed with, many reasons why sometimes I'm disappointed in the way he handles these interviews. But this is one that I was like super disappointed in the fact that he didn't really push back on Hotez on anything. But he did have Frankie Edgar on before. And Frankie Edgar, the MMA fighter, his wife has Lyme disease. And they shared some personal stories. And Rogan shared a story about how he has a friend, and I think it's his manager, somebody related to his manager, or somebody really close to him and in his inner circle, that had got the Lyme disease vaccine and got Lyme disease from it. And then eventually the Lyme disease vaccine, they discontinued it because of people suing or because of all the negative adverse reactions or whatever. So he had this personal story with the Lyme disease vaccine. Well, let's fast forward to Hotez being on the show. One way or another, the vaccine gets brought up, right? And it was a friend of Hotez who created or patented the vaccine. And it gets brought up, and Hotez says that it was discontinued because of the anti-vax movement, made people lose faith in vaccines. So that's why they discontinued it. And he's like, well, wasn't it discontinued because people were getting Lyme disease from the vaccine? He's like, no. And then he's like, that's not what happened. He's like, well, I know somebody who got Lyme disease from the vaccine. He's like, oh, that's impossible. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure they determined it came from the vaccine. And then Rogan also made the point that he's like, if it was all because people lost faith in the vaccine, how come they haven't discontinued like the MMR vaccine or any of these other vaccines that are linked to autism, because there's the anti-vax movement is also demonized those vaccines. And he's like, well, those, and I forget what bullshit thing he said, but this is where I'm stunned by people not being able to connect the dots as well as somebody like you or myself, that not to give us that much credit, but I think like sometimes the dots are really obvious and it's easy to connect. You obviously just exposed this guy, that his credibility just goes out the fucking window. You have a personal story that you know for a fact that somebody and doctors that were, that don't have anything to gain from pushing a vaccine, think that somebody that you know personally had a adverse reaction to this Lyme disease vaccine. This guy refuses to, even with your personal story, refuses to believe your story is accurate and true, and pushes back and doesn't even entertain the fact that could even be a possibility. That every light bulb should fucking go off. And it took until the COVID thing for him to finally be like, oh, apparently maybe we've been lied to a little bit about vaccines. Like, it's just, it just blows me away how many people can accept one thing and then still, like, they just, I don't know, it's a baby steps. Maybe internally he's having that discussion and he's thinking like, is this motherfucker full of shit? But maybe I can't say it until I'm 100%, sure of it, because I have one of the biggest platforms on earth, and people will jump down my throat.
Has he had RFK Jr. on?
So during the height of the lockdown, at the very last 30 seconds of my interview with Del Bigtree. So he's been on my show twice since the lockdown. So the first time he was on, I'm like, we got to get you on. I think I said like you or RFK on Joe Rogan. And he's like, I think his exact words were, Joe Rogan is a pussy. He's like, we've been trying to get on his show. We've talked to his people, all this stuff. He's like, he will not have RFK Jr. on his show. He's like, he will not have me on the show. And I'm hoping one of these days I go to the Spotify app, I open up JRE, and I will be pleasantly surprised the same way I was when Dr. Sanjay Gupta was there, because I knew that he was not on to agree with Rogan. And what happened on that show is exactly how I was hoping it was going to turn out, that he was going to be exposed to be a fraud, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. I'm hoping to see that RFK or Del Bigtree or somebody from our side, who can really bring some good information, bring a logical discussion, and represent our perspective fairly. I think I'm hoping that will happen. And I don't know if he has so much pull in regards to moving the population in one direction or another that he's maybe worried about, I don't know, but he's had Alex Jones on. So that's the thing. I'm like, and I know they're friends, so it's different. Maybe he has he's like, hey, this is my buddy. How do I not have him on? But I just really hope that we're taking baby steps in the direction of eventually having Robert Kennedy Jr. on, and somebody who can speak properly about these issues, and really maybe open people's minds to the fact that maybe all along we've been lied to about how effective vaccines are. And honestly, my opinion is always like, even if you could prove to me that a vaccine is useful and helps, there's no better medicine than the one that your body makes. Your body makes, even if you believe in vaccine science and the way they work, a traditional vaccine, not the new COVID vaccines, you're still putting faith into your own natural immune system that creates the antibodies and the T cells and all the things that you need to fight whatever you might be fighting. So how about you just give your body the things it needs prior to getting sick? Get your immune system strong, be ready, be prepared, and then when your body gets sick, it's good to go. It'll do that naturally anyways, and there is a concern too about, some people have said this in the past, and I don't know specifically too much about this specific issue, but the fact that getting a vaccine, you're also bypassing some steps in the process of being exposed to a virus. When you get something on the surface of your skin or through your mouth or your nose or whatever, it doesn't directly go into your system, so you're almost skipping a step, which could cause some issues or confusion or whatever with the way your body naturally has been fighting diseases since the beginning of time. So these are all interesting topics, and I'm glad that more and more of these topics are not fringe to bring up at a dinner anymore, and maybe it still will turn into a heated conversation that could ruin a family dinner, like what sparked your book and and ruined I think it's still worth having. And I ruined a Easter. I shouldn't say I ruined, but there was a Easter during the lockdown that I got in a pretty heated argument with some family members, and those family members, which were so adamant about me being wrong and that COVID was way more serious than I was taking it, and no, the vaccine's being developed to save lives or whatever. Neither of them been vaccinated, and both of them are avoiding getting it. So sometimes planting that seed, there is resistance when you tell somebody that something that they believe their whole lives is wrong, and also the other thing is who's telling you this information is somebody that sometimes gets put in that box of conspiracy theorists. So you assume that this is just a relative or family member or friend that just looks for the conspiracies and everything. So your first reaction is like, maybe they're just connecting dots that aren't there. But, sometimes planting that seed is worth it. And it's worth maybe dealing with some friction for a little bit, because somewhere deep inside their subconscious, maybe you planted that seed of doubt, and that that will be baby steps in the direction of questioning the mainstream narrative, and you contribute to that, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, RFK Jr.'s on. He's the current interview on Higher Side Chats with Carlwood, so he's been making the rounds. We should reach out to him for the Union show. I mean, why not?
I do have some contact info. I know the last few times I've talked to him or to his people or whoever it is that I talked to, he was probably, I think last time I reached out to him, they're like, oh, he's booked for a while. And you're right. I was thinking
open. His schedule's opening up. Nobody wants to talk to him anymore.
Yeah. Well, he has
a book out,
Yeah, the Fauci book, which I hear is really, I haven't got it yet, but I hear, have you looked into it?
No, but Jamie Deluxe was telling me that it was awesome.
Yeah. He's done some really good work into researching Fauci specifically, which I think is really important, because James Corbett did a great documentary on Bill Gates, but and everybody in the eugenics movement, or people who are aware of the eugenics movement and people linked to the eugenics philosophy kind of knew of Bill Gates, but Fauci was, like you said, it was new to a lot of people. And doing a deep dive into his background and who he's linked to, and it's pretty amazing that people like you and myself didn't know much about him when he was the highest paid government official forever and had all this influence. But that shows how many people are out there that are pulling the strings and having incredible influence on the world, that even people like you and I who are deep into this world don't even know who the fuck they are.
I didn't know who he was. And he has had $100 billion of grant money flow through his dirty little weasel rat-like fingers, where he's been able to allocate that money and give that to people in laboratories and in other organizations that can cover for him. It's hard to go out and write bad stories about a guy that's given you a bunch of money. Of course, Gates has done the same thing with the media, and Fauci has done that in the scientific community through being able to silence anybody that would ever challenge his authority. Just give them more money. Just keep, here you go. So yeah, it's interesting that for as much as we've uncovered and as much as we know, or we think we know, there's always so much more out there that we don't know. There's always some, but Whitney Webb's going to write some article about some company I've never even heard of, and I'm going to be like, holy shit, this exists too. We're going to get ourselves to a point where you don't even want to you can't go to bed at night. You're just up shaking and waiting for it all to come up, fall apart. But I don't think that's, I don't know that that's necessarily a good place for us to be in this worrying, scared, down on the, freaking out, waiting for the next shoe to drop, waiting for the next variant to drop, all this stuff. I feel like it's really now or never for humanity, for America, for the world. Like, if we allow the Bill de Blasios and Gavin Newsoms of the world to continue these insane lockdowns, ramp them up, vaccine passports, can't travel, can't get in, can't sit down in a restaurant without one. If we allow this stuff, like, it's fucking on us as society. It's kind of like our fault too. Like, well, it's a shared responsibility. If you allow this stuff, like, we simply cannot have that. We can't allow vaccine passports to exist, because they will morph into something that is so dangerous and so dystopian that we won't even recognize the world anymore.
Well, that's the thing that, not to bring up Portugal again, but that's the thing that I was telling my family about Portugal that I've been kind of surprised about, because my parents were alive. I mean, they were small, but they were alive when Salazar, which was the last dictatorship they had in Portugal, was ruling. And it's like, so I have grandparents who lived through that, and people have grandparents, but my grandparents passed away, but my people who have grandparents still alive, like they have grandparents who probably lived through that. They have parents that lived through that. And so dictatorships and governments trying to convince you that they're taking away your freedoms and taking away your rights and controlling your life to protect you and for the greater good. That wasn't that long ago where they've been tricked into that. And it's like, can't you guys learn from history? Can't you learn from, like, this wasn't that far back, and you guys are just falling for it again? Like, I don't, it boggles my mind, because a lot of these European countries, they have similar histories where not too long ago, they had monarchies. Not too long ago, they had dictators. Not too long ago, they had corrupt governments that try to do the same thing under the same pretenses of we're just protecting you. And so it just, I wonder if there's more pushback than we're aware of. I've been looking for a Portuguese journalist who's on the ground there, who's from the other perspective, just to try to get just a feel of, like, okay, is there some type of resistance? Because we all know the TV can create any illusion they want. And I want to believe there's a illusion that everybody is just complying in Portugal or in many of these countries. I mean, not just Portugal, like that. I mean, I live in Massachusetts. From the outside looking in, it probably looks like there's no resistance in Massachusetts. Everybody's just complying with, 3 or 4 different bathrooms and transgender sex in your, in your preschools and then whatever else that they're pushing in Massachusetts, and everybody's just okay for, and all for it. And there's actually just I saw when I was at the gym this morning, a Massachusetts, I think it's in Andover, Massachusetts, which is south of Boston. A teacher just got fired because of her. She was critical of critical race theory and got fired, and now she's suing. And but yeah, all these, I mean, from the outside looking in, you can assume that everybody's all for these things that's another thing that we learned from the pandemic, is that they can tell you the skies are falling, people are dying everywhere, hospitals are filled. You have no evidence in your own personal life of these things, but yet people believe it. And even though what their eyes are saying when they look around is completely different, they believe that, no, the world is falling. So that's kind of what I'm concerned about. Like, okay, the TV is telling me that everybody in Portugal and a lot of these countries like Canada and other places where just about everybody's getting vaccinated and everybody's petrified, that there's no resistance. There's nobody who is skeptical of what the fuck's going on. But I want to believe that there's probably more of us and that's probably a fact that because you look at just protests have been suppressed from the public, videos of protests have been suppressed from the public, all the protests that are going on all over the world that nobody's reporting on besides alternative media.
A million people marching past the BBC, and BBC is just crickets. Like,
yeah, that's wild.
But you can't do that forever without people going, like, we're all out here on the street. turn on it. Hey, mom, turn on the BBC tonight. You'll see me. I walked right by and and then they turn it on and there's nothing. I mean, at some point, the media loses what's left of their credibility if they keep trying to play that game, right? I mean, right? Please, hopefully, right? Are people actually going to wake up to this, or is?
Well, people have woken up. I mean, I feel like things that we've said this over and over again. You and I both on our personal shows and also on the Unwanted. I mean, things that were conspiracy theory 18 months ago, we're talking about, in public discussions, and people. I mean, how many people said they, well, it was funny how many people said they didn't want to get the Trump vaccine when he was in office and whatnot. And like, there's so many people who talked about, just tracking people would never happen. Vaccine passports would never happen. This would never happen. That would never happen. And yet it's all happening, and it's all, so I think it's kind of and then also vaccine deaths. I remember a local news station on their Facebook page, the second the vaccine was available, they had an article that popped up on my Facebook feed saying vaccine was just released and there's already conspiracy theories going around saying that people are dying from the vaccine, something along those lines. And I remember commenting, I'm like, well, how the fuck do you guys know that's not true if the vaccine was just released? But my point is, like, they were so confident that these are all conspiracy theories and there's no evidence here. You don't hear stories like that anymore because again, and it goes back to what you're saying. How long can you suppress the truth until eventually it comes out? And I think that, not linking deaths and heart attacks and heart inflammation to the vaccine, like that can be done in short periods of time. But eventually, like, enough people are going to know people personally. I mean, it's what happened with the COVID thing. Like, people were scared shitless of COVID. Like, we stayed home because we didn't want to get it. And then it got to the point where, like, people who were getting it were fine. And then it's like, well, now we got to change the narrative because we can't keep convincing them that this is a deadly virus if nobody's dying from it. So what we need to do is just talk about, like, how we have to stop the spread of cases. It's a pandemic of cases, which is so fucking ridiculous, because it's like, what the fuck does that even mean?
There's nothing.
I know people who have COVID or who test positive that I don't even, like, we talk about this, like, I don't even think about calling or text messaging a friend who has COVID to say, are you okay? Do you need something? How bad is it? Because it's like, so many of the people I know had mild to no symptoms that we're not even concerned about it. But if I know somebody had cancer or something more serious, like I don't know, just one of the many things that are more serious than COVID, I'd be concerned about them. I'd be contacting them. I'd be like, are you okay? Do you need something? Right. And I'd be worried about my friends or family members' health. COVID's such a fucking joke that nobody cares. People get COVID, nobody cares because it's not serious at all. And yet we still have places like Massachusetts that is adamant about these vaccine buses that go to our high schools. They're proposing, unmasking the kids only when we have 80% vaccinated school systems. It's like, there's no discussion about having little to no cases or just no COVID spread. It's all about just vaccinating people. That's the only way we're gonna get masks.
They want to be fair. They want to be afraid. I think some people like being afraid. I think some people like being told what to do. I think they like the government telling them what to do. I think they like the television telling them what to do. They like Dr. Fauci to tell them what to do. They just want to be told what to do. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Well, those people are fucking dangerous as far as I'm concerned, because they're mindless. They're unwilling or unable to actually look at the situation and make an assessment. And I'm not saying you have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a virologist, but let's just look at the body of evidence here. And you tell me, is the response proportionate to the dangerous nature of the virus? And the answer is absolutely not. That the response has been disproportionately psychotic to a virus with a 99.98% survivability rate if you get it, which isn't to say that everybody gets it, but if you get it, you're going to be fine. You're going to live. Now, what about all the people that have died from it? Well, let's talk about all the people that have died from it. From it or with it. First of all, let's talk about the death, the way they changed the way you report deaths, the way you classify deaths. The death certificate reporting changed in March of 2020 so that COVID could be the number one cause of death on the first column, and everything else could be, they wanted to list the adverse or the comorbidity, the other conditions on a different chart. And 64% of the people that died from COVID had 6 comorbidity conditions, like being extremely overweight, having heart disease, having cancer, having lung problems, taking poor care of yourself. All these things contributed to it. So it's like they started manipulating the data from the beginning. They started manipulating the way you count deaths or what actually is COVID. It's not pneumonia. It's not the flu. The flu up and vanished. So it's like all of these data points, if you just take them, just one of them, maybe it's not the biggest deal. But if you're somebody on the outside that's looking at this COVID thing and you just see fraud after manipulation, after statistical manipulation, after another, it's like at some point I would think you would have to say, why are you doing all that? Why are you guys manipulating the numbers so much? If this is really happening and it's dangerous the way you say it is, and everybody's going to die and then why do you feel the need for the manipulation? And where I go with that is that you have to manipulate because it's not real in the sense that they want it to be. It's not to the levels that they say. It's not as dangerous as they say it's going to be. They'd love for it to be. They'd love for it to be the Black Plague. It's just not. And so now they're having to prop it up and keep the fear going by manipulating numbers. And I just say that's just an inconsistent thing that you would do if you were in a real pandemic. Like if you were in a real pandemic, you certainly wouldn't have to manipulate the numbers. And yet here we are with every component of the numbers, cases, who's got it, where it's being spread, how many people in the hospital, what's the vaccination rates. They're faking those numbers too. Every statistical data point is being manipulated. And yet we're supposed to take it all seriously while it's constantly changing. I feel like it's just like a huge litmus test. And we're damn near 2 years into this thing. And like, if you still haven't figured it out, like maybe your brain isn't working.
Well, the other thing too is you talked about they would want it to be more deadly. Another thing that is accepted to be a possibility that was a conspiracy theory 18 months ago was where the virus came from and if it was man-made or natural. And think about how that story is not even something people care about. It's not something people discuss. It doesn't seem to be a big deal. If it was more deadly, it'd be a much bigger deal. Because the origin of a virus that is actually killing a lot of people, you think would be a much bigger deal if it was actually killing a lot of people. I almost feel like people don't really care about where it came from and if it was man-made or who funded it, because they're not taking the virus seriously. And even the people who are pro-mask and pro-vaccine, I don't think they're even taking the virus seriously. They're just people who have always done what they're told. They never go against the grain. They've never questioned officials or mainstream narratives, and this is all linked to other topics you and I have talked about on our shows, and that's the school systems and then dumbing down of people and teaching kids not how to think but what to think, and just teaching them how to regurgitate information and not question things. And so that's what happens when you have a population of people that are taught not to question authority, not to question anything. Just do what you're told, be a good civilian, be a good person, and just, follow the herd. When something like this happens, that's what a majority of the population does. And we would have much more of a resistance if more people were critical thinking and willing to question people. I mean, you put a PhD on a wall and it's like, all of a sudden their opinion is more valid than you and I. And it's like, well, can we just talk about the information that I'm presenting? Can we talk about the information I've read or researched? And who cares where the information is coming from? Because it's just, it's mind boggling. I think there are going to be, the same way there's going to be people have said, oh, there's just a percentage of the population that's always going to be anti-vax. You're never going to vaccinate them. I also think there's a percentage of the population that are always going to be pro-vax and are going to just do what they're told no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. It's dangerous to just comply. And I think that I would, I always want to remind people that we have an option. Do not comply with unjust orders. Nobody has more of a right to your body than you. If you give up bodily autonomy, you do so at your own peril. If you give that up to the government, you're an idiot. They don't want the things that you want. So there's so much with this. It's been frustrating to see a lot of people just fall in line when really we need them to not comply, and they view like their compliance as somehow like a good thing, because we've just kind of been trained that's what you do. You don't want to rock the boat and all this stuff. Well, I think you have to rock the boat. I think you need to. And now is the time to do it. Do not comply with unjust orders. It's just your soul will be in conflict if you do that. You'll feel it. You'll feel like you've sold out. I don't know what's going on with Ripple Effect. You always have really good guests. You do the Rogan long form interview better than just about anyone out there. You go on super duper deep dives, and I always like that. Where are you taking it in 2022? What are we thinking?
That's a good question. I mean, I hope to have Robert Kennedy Jr. on the show in 2022. Yeah, I've been very lucky that I've most people that I've had on my bucket list, I've had on the show. Do you pester them, or do you just catch them in the right time? I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, and I don't know what tactics you use, but I use all the tactics. I attempt to, I'll go on every social. It used to be easier, I feel like, because I feel like, I don't know if it was just people didn't contact or reach out on social media as much as they used to, or they didn't get as many emails as they used to, or something. But it does seem like it's a little bit more difficult now. But I try everything. Like I'll look for, you're an author. There's a lot of authors will have websites specifically for a book that they released. The name of the website, the URL will be the name of the book. Sometimes they'll have, before an author really blows up, you'll find a email on a older website that they had for an older book, and then as they get bigger, then eventually they're like, well, I'm getting way too much fucking email. Let me not share my personal email address. So sometimes, you just find old websites that have old personal information. I do that. I'll try Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I'll send messages everywhere, and and sometimes it's the luck of the draw. I think I've shared this story before on my show with Mariana Van Zeller, who did Oxycontin Express and she's actually a Portuguese journalist and filmmaker, but she's done a bunch of really good documentaries. She's been on Rogan's show twice, but she had a pretty big following, and I couldn't get a hold of her, and her being Portuguese and whatnot, I'm like, oh, it'd be awesome to get her on. Mm-hmm. And tried everything, couldn't get a hold of her. And one night, I think I just saw that she tweeted something. So I'm like, you know what? Does this mean that she's on her phone or on a desktop and she's looking at Twitter at this exact moment? So how quick can I send out a tweet to her right now? Right, and so I just wrote it immediately. And then she wrote me back, yeah, I'd love to be on. She DM'd me, and then we end up getting hooked up. So sometimes that works. I think Mickey Willis, when he was still on Facebook, when he would post something, I'd be like, hey, if you want to be on, I'd love to have you on the Ripple Effect podcast. I'm a big fan or whatever. And I wrote him, and I think I did it a few times before eventually somebody I don't even think it was him. Somebody on his team contacted me like, yeah, contact me and we'll hook something up. And I'm like, oh, great. So it's random. I try everything. I mean, people, I think, do you get asked that question a lot? Like, hey, how do you book your guests, or do you have any advice? Yeah. I get it's a question I get a lot, and I'm always like, well, there's not really, one way of doing it. Like, I don't know how I got Jim Florentine on, and sometimes as your show grows, you get hit up by people like, remember that show Sports Science on Sports Center?
Yeah.
What the fuck's his name? Now I feel like an asshole forgetting his name.
Brian Green?
No, Brian. It was
who was the guy that you sent me not the sports. I was thinking the sports gambling guy.
You're thinking of sports. Brian Toohey, that's who you're thinking
Brian
of.
Toohey, yeah.
You should have him on, because you guys would. He'd be awesome.
Well, you sent me his stuff. I should have him on. That would be a really interesting guy to talk to about.
Because it's two topics that you both can talk highly about: conspiracies, corruption, and sports. But it was the guy from Sports Science, the short blonde guy who. The little Sports Science segment. Somebody he's a pretty big guest. He has a pretty well-known guy, and somebody just hit me up. Hey, he wants to be on your show, and I'm like, really? I'm like, sure, why not? So sometimes as your show grows, and I've been one of those shows where I've had so many people from so many different backgrounds, musicians on, comedians on, scientists. I've always been really big in the arts and nutrition and that type of stuff, so I've had Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, Dr. Sean Baker, it's, and sometimes I'm stunned by the people that are willing to come on, like, when
Roger Stone. Remember when you got Roger Stone on Union of the Unwanted, and he connected in with, he had to use his IT guy's computer, so it was like Alejandro Espinoza or something, like under his name. Everyone's like, what the fuck is going on? It's Roger Stone. Why is he trying to pretend like he's some Spanish guy? And it's like, it's a long story, and it's super funny if nobody knows why he's doing it except you and me, and like I think Mike. We were like,
that was hilarious. Yeah. Well, it was funny because some of the people that we've gotten on You've Unwanted, and the mixture of people, I think I told you this on a phone call once. I'm like, why did I think of having a show with Greg Palast and Mel K? Why did I think that?
Right, yeah.
I'm like, I think the reason, the tensions, and I think you felt it, right? Did you notice it? Like the tensions, people were so worked up, and this happens between or near every election. So it's like we're doing shows with big groups of people who are very passionate about their views and very passionate about what was going on in the world, and it was maybe just a bad timing, and I think the same thing with we talked about this. You've had him on, and I've had him on twice. Dennis McKenna, where he's such a fun guy to talk to, and he has so many interesting perspectives and insight on so many interesting topics. And when you have him on near election time, even he's not immune to all that tension and that emotion of the country. And I remember going to the gym and I felt like everybody was just tensed up. I felt like there was everybody was at the break of a argument or a political discussion. And because the media just kept force feeding you all this stuff and did such a great job of just making anybody who had a different opinion that you had, like it made us look at them like they were the enemy. And it just, it's wild, but yeah, it's cool. I mean, I had Roger Stone on. Really, the first time I had him on was about the JFK assassination, and it was his book on it was called the man who killed Kennedy, the case against LBJ, I believe was the name of the book. And it was because I've done a bunch of shows on the JFK assassination, so it was interesting to get a perspective from, okay, well, what did LBJ, what was his hand in all this, and what was that perspective? And I've done a couple of JFK assassination roundtables with a bunch of people that I've had on, Dr. James D. Genio and Russ Baker and Jeff Murley, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's one of those guys that he can be a little rough around the edges. He has amazing research, but he's not the most likable of people, for better term. And
some of those guys.
Yeah. So it's but yeah, I mean, just I think, I tell podcasters, I'm like, start small, like I did. I would get now looking back, they're kind of bigger characters, but at the time they were kind of not as well known in the mainstream. But like Daniele Bignelli was one of the first people that came on my show. Jason Burmis, James Corbett, Actually very surprised that Dr. Brzezinski from the Brzezinski documentary came on my show really early. And he has, I mean, if nobody's ever looked into his whole story, his story is fucking crazy.
Not Zbigniew Brzezinski, right?
Not
No, different.
Yeah, no, he's the guy he was a PhD Polish immigrant who was like this medical genius, and then he ended up finding this treatment that was curing and treating cancer. Went to go get it FDA approved, and instead of getting it FDA approved, they end up suing him and saying that he illegally patented his treatment or something like that. And for years, could only treat people under experimental because it wasn't FDA approved. So he could only get people that were terminally ill. And that includes some CIA heads, that includes some Saudi family members. Like there's been people he's in Texas, and his story is insane because there's even a part of the documentary that, well, first, real quick, the beginning of the documentary will pull your heartstrings. I mean, it's one of the few documentaries that I've remember watching it and I was like legitimately upset watching it. And,
what's it called?
It's actually the name of the documentary is his name, Brzezinski, and I think the subtitle. There's been two parts of it. It was by Eric Mercola, I think was his name, the filmmaker. He's been on my show too. It was a Brzezinski. I think the business behind cancer, or cancer is a business, something. If you look up his name, Brzezinski, you can find it. And it's, I think it's still on YouTube. So many things have been purged from YouTube, so who knows? But I'm sure you'll be able to find on some of the alternative platforms like Odyssey or BitChute. But it was an amazing documentary. There was this police officer who had twins. One of them was had cancer, terminally ill, and they said if we give them radiation, then they can live a little longer. He's like, anything that will obviously keep my child alive longer, I'm going to do it. He did it. It was so toxic and it was so harmful to his child that they had to use gloves to change the diaper because the urine was so toxic and actually harming the baby. So he stops doing the chemo or in the radiation, and then he finds out about Dr. Brzezinski. Goes to Dr. Brzezinski, goes to an independent hospital to do just to see how the treatment's coming along, because they didn't want anybody who's biased or whatnot. So they go to an independent hospital. They were seeing that the tumor was shrinking, and I think, I don't know, like 2 months or something like that, completely the tumor was gone, cancer free. A year later, the child dies. They do an autopsy. They find out that the radiation killed the child. Oof. This guy testifies in court, tells this story in court, and he's like, he shares the story. And he's like, and you're trying to put this guy in jail. You're trying to stop this guy. He's like, if I knew of his treatment, he's like, my child would be alive right now. And there's also this other guy who came from like some I don't know if it was a communist country or a country with a dictator. And he's like, not even in my country that I came from would a dictator or president or anybody, the government, stop you from getting a treatment. And he's like, here, you're banning this treatment that has saved people. And there's people who, like I said, only terminally ill people can go see him. And because it was experimental, they wouldn't give him his FDA approved approval. And yet there's people that were alive that literally mainstream medicine said there's no other options, do what you may. And they're like, okay, well, I guess I can go to Dr. Brzezinski now because they're saying that they can't do anything else for me. And there's people that are alive because of it. Those people testified in court. They picketed for him. They sponsored him and funded him because basically the FDA knew that they couldn't. He didn't do anything illegal. They knew that they had no case on him. So what they kept doing is they just kept bringing him to court, hoping he'd run out of funds. Mm-hmm. And there's been a part of the documentary where a judge looks at the FDA attorney and says, "What are you guys doing? Like, you just keeps getting dismissed, and like this isn't working. What are you doing? Like basically saying like it's obvious you're just fucking like finding any thing that you can sue him for." And just to bring, you're wasting our time, And so it just, again, this is one of those stories that exposes how powerful Big Pharma is. And then he came on my show within the first year of my show. I want to say maybe even the first 6 months of my show. And I had very little to no following at the time. And in his documentary, they show how they get these firms and these companies to just harass anybody who says anything positive about them and just dismiss. So you dismiss it. If you Google search him, all you're going to find is that he's a murderer. He's he's been debunked. All this stuff, the typical nonsense. And I'm like, wow, man, they got trolls, like hired trolls. I was so excited when he came on my show because this was like really early in my podcast. I say career, but I'm not really making any money doing this, so I'm just going to say passion project. in my podcast passion project kind of venture, and immediately when I tweeted or shared on Facebook or where all the social media platforms I'm on, that I'm like super excited. Dr. Brzezinski, said he'd be on. Immediately got attacked by like trolls everywhere, saying like just comment after comment after comment, and I'm just like, holy fuck. And I'm like, I'm a nobody, and they're jumping down my throat, making sure that they discredit him every place. So it's like the power of what's really going on, and the propaganda that's being pushed, the real propaganda, not what they think are conspiracy theories, but what's really going on, and the propaganda that they're pushing in regards to just making you think that you should dismiss anybody who has similar views to us. Those people exist. They've existed for a long time. This medical freedom issue has been an issue for a long time, and it's not new, and that was kind of just a small sample that I got. I experienced personally about how they can character assassinate immediately, and that there's people who are paid to do so. And so I didn't answer any of your questions, I'm sure.
All right. It's okay. That's okay. That's all right. No, you did actually, because I just was curious as to what we're where the ripple effect is going, how it works, all that good stuff. Some
guests are on to look forward to. I just did that one that I referenced with you in our conversation with the sniper Secret Service agent for Trudeau, who's going to be on with Dr. Jessica Rhodes. That interview is already recorded. Whenever this is released, maybe it'll hopefully already be out, or if not, it'll be out shortly. I have Aaron Franz coming back on the show. And I'm so bad at knowing who's coming on in the future, but I know who's coming on this week because I at least look at the schedule that far in advance. And Aaron Franz, who wrote Age of Transition and did an amazing documentary on transhumanism way back in the day before anybody even really cared about the topic, way ahead of his time. He was on my show years ago, and I'm having him back on to kind of reconnect on that topic because obviously,
good timing for that, man.
And then Richard Grove will be back on this week too at some point, and some other stuff I think too. But you can find it all on therippleeffectpodcast.com and see where all the places you can find the show.
That's Ricky Varandas, everybody. You can check out his stuff wherever podcasts are served. It'll help you get through your day, listen to it at work, do all that good stuff. And of course, you can catch us on the Union of the Unwanted. We do that show on Monday nights twice a month, every other Monday night on Rockfin Live, and then it goes out as an RSS feed, and also goes out in video format to whoever is a participant on the show so that they can share it with their friends and family. Ricky, you're the best. Thanks for coming on. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for dealing with my rants.
And if you guys like this episode, take the additional step right now of sharing it with your friends and family so that we can help the show to grow. If you want to connect with me, you can do so at the website, The Octopus of Global Control. You can follow me on Twitter at Macroaggressions, and I will talk to you all soon.